Okay, I think we are now live. So welcome everybody to this panel on all the things that are happening in immersive media in Africa at the moment. And to talk about that, I've got an incredible panel. I'll be introducing my panelists shortly, but first I'll just introduce myself. I am INGRID KOPP. I run Electric South here in Cape Town with Stephen Mark. We're a non-profit organized reality, augmented realities. And in that role, I have worked with all of these panelists in various ways. So I'm really excited to jump into this conversation with them today. Immersive media in Africa is obviously a subject very, very close to my heart. And it's something that, you know, I'm constantly thinking about and trying to sort of figure out the best path forward. And I think right now in this pandemic moment, it feels like a real sort of make or break moment in a way for where we're going to go for where and how we're going to go forward. So I think this is a great opportunity to have this conversation. And hopefully for those of you listening who maybe haven't yet dipped your toes into this space, we'll also talk a little bit about ways, avenues that you can kind of get involved and organizations that can kind of support you in that work in Africa in various regions and countries. Okay, so without further ado, let me introduce my panelists. I'm going to introduce them one by one and just let them kind of talk a little bit about themselves and their work, and then we'll jump into the meat of the conversation. So Judith, let me start with you. Judith OKONKWO from Lagos runs an amazing company there called Immersive 3D. Over to you, Judith.
Thank you very much, Ingrid. It's a pleasure to be here with you all this morning. As Ingrid has said, my name is Judith OKONKWO. I run an extended reality creation lab based in Lagos, Nigeria. And the work that we're doing is focused on developing the ecosystem for these immersive technologies. So that's everything from augmented reality through to virtual reality. In terms of ecosystem development, our work is focused in three main ways. We spend a lot of time on evangelization, creating awareness around the technologies, getting people their first touch and feel, helping them understand what the technologies are. And we do this kind of like across all sectors. The second element of our work that's critical is actually building up a community of content creators who can utilize these technologies to create. And we want to be able to inspire people to get involved in the sector, to want to build. And then the third element of our work is where we work in specific sectors where we see a lot of room for significant impact with these technologies locally. And we support, industries across different verticals to figure out ways in which they can engage with these technologies across Africa.
Awesome. Sounds like you're really busy. Thanks, Judith. And next up we go to GARETH STEELE in Johannesburg, is part of an amazing organization called Eden. Gareth, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Thanks, Ingrid. So my name's Gareth. I'm from Johannesburg, South Africa. I'm currently working in the VR and AR space, specifically at an XR studio in Johannesburg called Eden. And here at Eden, we are on a mission to make VR easy for anybody who likes to use the technology. You know, we've got a lot of experience with public-facing arts and technology shows in the past, and from our frustrations and our sort of learnings in that environment, we've started developing a product which we call the Eden Snacker, which is a hardware and software solution for deploying immersive content at various public-facing touch points. We also run a arts program concurrently with that, where we invite different artists from different backgrounds to come to our studios and learn about these new technologies. Obviously, we know artists are the big risk takers and the ones who really push the development and the thoughts behind these technologies. So we obviously before Corona had quite an extensive art program where we were sort of inviting these practitioners to our labs and allowing them sort of hands-on experience with the technology. I think it's really important, as Judith mentioned, to expose people to these technologies and see what the different potentials are for these new voices that are developing in the medium. So a big part of our work is obviously awareness and show and tell and educating and upskilling and showing people how to use the technologies. And obviously with our hardware and software platform that we're developing, we're trying to sort of bridge the gap between audiences and content creators.
Fantastic, thank you. And just to let those of you on Zoom know, I'm going to try and share some of the links to some of the sites we're talking about in the chat, so that you can save those links for later if you want to go and investigate the Eden Snacker and some of the other organizations we're going to be talking about today. Another thing I just wanted to jump in and say is if you do have any questions, whether you're on Facebook Live, YouTube, or on Zoom, please just pop them in the box, and we will be feeding them into the conversation throughout. So you can ask questions at any time. If anything isn't making sense, or you want to know how to get, how to get in touch with any of us, or how to get into the industry, any questions, please jump in, because we really want this to be a panel where you can kind of find out as much as you need to about what's happening in Africa right now and how you can get involved. Okay, Brian AFANDE from Nairobi. We're running a great organization there called BlackRhino VR. Over to you.
Thank you, Ingrid. Just like Ingrid said, my name is Brian AFANDE. I'm based in Nairobi. I co-founded a company called BlackRhino VR. We started out as a 360 film company. And then I think over the years, we've been able to build a proposition around the extended reality, within the extended reality spectrum. So we changed from being just a studio into what we call an extended reality agency. And 30% of that we put in the company is also towards geared into building the community and ecosystems to ensure that there's some form of value circulating within the XR, what we call the XR industry here. We have three guiding principles within BlackRhino VR, and we call them the 3 Ds. So the first D is demystification. We hold demystification sessions. How do we build the technology in such a way that people get to trust it? Because trusting technology is also a huge thing, we realize. So we have demystification sessions. This is part of also our outreach programs, which I'll explain later. The second D is democratization. How do we make it accessible to people, from the platforms that we're building to the hardware and all the work that is going into just making sure that the technology is accessible to people. And the third D is something that we really feel that will lead into the future of this extended reality, of course, which is deployment, building infrastructure, hard and soft infrastructure as well. When talks with government, with the government here, with private sectors, people who can really help us with building the infrastructure. We have 3 outreach programs that we are really proud of, because when we started the company, it wasn't even about making money. It was always about how do we build a community. This has always been our guiding principle. So our 3 outreach programs are, number 1 is the Moran Story Lab. The Moran is essentially a Maasai male. However, this is the perfect example of repurposing era. The Moran Story Lab is a school for women in VR. So when we set up the Moran Story Lab, the idea was for us to make sure that we have a lot of people present in the whole virtual reality training. It's a school, we don't charge any school fees. But then as the years went by, we realized that there's a deficiency of women in the whole VR and XR value chain. So we opted and we started actually setting up a school for the women. The school is funded by the Ford Foundation, and also Oculus really helped us with the infrastructure for the school. And the second product that we have, it's not actually a product, it's an outreach program. It's called the State of the Art, and just like Gareth, it empowers artists within the extended reality spectrum. How do they start working with augmented reality, virtual reality as a form of expression? And the third and least is, but not least, is what we call XR Without Borders. So next month, we're launching XR Without Borders. We're really excited about it. And the whole idea is it's a community of people coming together to come up with different solutions, to come up with different solutions for the problems we have in Africa. And I'll share that when it's really out. Right now, I've shared my link to my website, so you can be able to follow some of the action.
Great, thank you. That's really awesome. And again, like, so much going on. And I think it's no accident that many of the things that you've all talked about sort of revolve around this idea of community and growing community. And I think, for me, that's such a key part of the work that we're all doing, because we kind of all see that without building the ecosystem, none of this is going to happen. And I think, that has been one of the things that really drove us to create Electric South, is to kind of be part of building this community. And actually, one of the reasons we've all worked together is we're part of this loose consortium called Immersive Africa. A lot of people have asked me where they can find more information on Immersive Africa. And this is a great opportunity to say we're all so busy doing these other things that we haven't quite gotten around yet to creating a space online for Immersive Africa, but we will. And as soon as we do that, we'll be sharing a lot more around that. But for now, you can look for the hashtag Immersive Africa to just find out more of the stuff that's happening around XR on the continent. That's kind of how we're just sharing our work at the moment, because this is very much a work in progress. So I wanted to start off, I know right now with the pandemic and with the economies of our respective countries in various states of disarray, it does feel like a very perilous moment in some ways. And I guess one of the things that I've been thinking is, often in these opportunities, in these moments where there feels like there's a real break in society, it can be very, very scary for artists and for those of us working in this space, but it is also an incredible opportunity to really kind of do the things, to kind of take risks and be brave. And so I just want to start off with kind of looking on the bright side of this, because I do want to come to the challenges, because I think there are some challenges that we are all facing. If you could maybe talk a little bit about just like what you're most excited about right now, like what you're seeing happening in Africa that really kind of, gets you out of bed in the morning. One of the things, I'm going to just kick it off. One of the things that I've constantly been excited about, and it's something that actually Dylan Valley talked about on the VR panel last week with Caitlin, was about the idea that this is a medium that hasn't been colonized, that we're kind of in an amazing moment where we're kind of inventing a medium from the beginning and hopefully bringing in voices from the beginning. So it kind of feels like a space that doesn't have this great burden of history. And for me, that is very, very exciting. It means that we can hopefully build it in a way that reflects the world that we want to see. And I think that's an incredible opportunity for all of us. It's also why it's so important that Africans are in this space right now. So that's kind of, I think for me, one of the real driving, it's my get out of bed thing, I guess, is that, we need to be in the space right now because we're building something from scratch. And that's super exciting. Judith, what is it for you? What are you excited about right now that you're seeing in African XR?
So a couple of things. When we first started the lab in 2016 in Lagos, one of the things that people would ask us when they encounter the technology, because of course everybody, would really enjoy it and all of that. But for the kind of like the young hustling Nigerians, the next question they would ask is, how can we make money from this? People wanted to know why they would devote their time to like investing and learning this technology and how that would provide returns. And I think this period has actually created opportunity for that, because the kind of like constant requests coming in, people are exploring VR. They want to know what opportunities they are to enhance their digital working, other elements of, business. And for that, I've seen a lot of young people now, coming to me to say, hey, we want to figure out how we can create this for this company, that sort of thing. So I'm very excited about that. The second thing is that we often run hackathons because we want to inspire people to not just know about the technologies, but build. And, this year originally we planned to run a hackathon in May. It was going to be the traditional 48-hour event in 10 African countries. But of course, the pandemic happened and we couldn't do that. What it has enabled, though, is that we're now able to run the hackathon in 2 stages. And the first stage is online. And we're now able to open that to every African country, which we wouldn't have been able to do if it was a traditional physical hackathon. So, right now we've got participants from over 21 African countries and counting, and we're open through to November. So I'm really excited about the possibility to engage lots more people around the continent with these technologies.
Awesome. Judith, maybe if you have a moment, you can post that link to the hackathon in the chat.
Of course, yes.
If people want to get involved, because I think the way that you've run these hackathons is really exciting, and just bringing in so many different countries in Africa, it's a mammoth task, and it feels like a great time to do that now. Gareth, how about you? What are you excited about right now?
I think there's a massive opportunity here. Obviously, that we've kind of all been forced to go digital in some way or another, and I think everybody's obviously jumping on Zoom and doing all these things remotely and trying to up their digital presence. So I think there's been a massive push for people to consider their digital presence and to consider how they interact, just across your general everyday working or social interactions, and I think it's a sort of a hyper awareness around digital interactions, and VR and immersive technologies for me are really starting to find their place, in this space. I think it's almost been like the catalyst or the catapult that we've all been waiting for to force people to start looking at these technologies and taking them seriously. I think we've ourselves personally, we found a lot of joy in actually getting together within virtual spaces and actually starting to share information and worlds that we've built specifically in VR chat. There's a really great community of local makers and international makers that are all starting to sort of convene in these digital spaces that it's so exciting. When you guys talk about XR without borders, this is the kind of thing that gets me really excited, because it allows you to sort of strip down those borders and be present with people, anywhere across the world within a virtual space, to actually use the medium for its best suited purpose, and that's to bring people together and to have shared experiences. So valuable. The communities are growing, people's awareness of the technology are growing. There's just, I think people are really starting to take note of the power of the technology. So I'm really excited for that, because it just means that, our voices are a lot more, have a lot more impact, because, it's time now, for this technology to move to its sort of more mature phase and to be used for the things that it's been promised us,
Great. And Brian, just before we come to you, we've had a question about what is a hackathon, which I think is a really good question. And I think we do sometimes throw around these terms. Judith, over to you. Define a hackathon.
Yes. My apologies for not doing that from the outset. So a hackathon traditionally is a 48-hour event. And really, it's just an event where you bring people together to create, build with specific technology. So it's gotten its traction from the tech space. And the way we do it, we invite people to apply to participate. And we say, come and create something using any of the extended reality technologies, and we'll give them specific themes or challenges. So for this particular hackathon that we're doing now, we have asked them to create around 5 verticals: education, healthcare, gaming, tourism, and the environment. And, they can create whatever they want that is a solution, around any of these areas. Over a 48-hour period, submit that, and then they get assessed and that do demos. So that's basically a hackathon in a nutshell.
Great, thank you. Brian, what are you excited about? You look excited.
No, I love Judith's explanation of the hackathon. Spot on, Judith. I think what we've been seeing right now in the industry is more of, I think COVID has made it necessary for companies to have digital footprint. And the idea for us we've been trying to have dialogue with different organizations and companies on how we can build a community. But then I think there was a huge disassociation between what solutions can we deploy in the market and what is it that they consider that can add value to some of their services and offerings. But right now, it's really shocking to see that a lot of key industry players are actually trying to getting to us and saying, guys, we've seen this social VR environment. How can you help us with this? We're trying to deploy different solutions for real estate. How can you help us bridge that gap? So I think that I totally agree with Gareth said. COVID is the unexpected catalyst of technological innovation. And we've seen a lot of, as my company, I think the busiest salesperson we have right now is our website, because we keep on getting a lot of emails. Guys, we're trying to deploy this in the market. Can you help us with it? So we're doing a lot of demystification sessions in different organizations and companies. And the reason why I think this is good for the ecosystem is some of these companies already have very powerful routes to market strategies, and they already know how to reach their consumers. So by deploying solutions in the market, they're already targeting the consumers with them, and they are doing half of the work that we wanted to do maybe 5 years ago. So it's reaching a point where I feel that industry needs, and also needs for us as protagonists.
Have we lost Brian? I think we might have. Oh, you just froze. I think you're back.
Yeah. So I'm just saying it's amazing for us to see that a lot of industry players are coming to us and saying, guys, we really need to start developing for the communities at large.
And I think that actually brings me to another point, which I think is interesting, is one of the, and this is actually one of the reasons, why we set up Electric South is I do think that I've always seen that there have been opportunities on the business side around XR in Africa, like those opportunities. I mean, obviously it feels like the market for that kind of goes a little bit like this, which I think is very common in the XR world right now. It's a very unstable market, but there are these amazing opportunities. What I guess has concerned me, and maybe that this is very relevant to this conversation with Encounters, is that creating a space for art, for film, for documentary is very, very fragile. And that space really has to be constantly protected and nurtured. And, it's kind of like keeping a garden, I guess. And it feels like it's constant work. It's not like you can just stop watering the plants or not plant the seeds one year. You have to keep doing it. Otherwise that work just doesn't happen. And I think that's just something that I just kind of want to weave into the discussion going forward is that, creating a space for art and for work that maybe doesn't have a clear business model is difficult. This is something that I'm sure if there are any traditional documentary makers listening, this is not unique to VR. This is something that we're constantly battling with in the traditional film world too, kind of creating a space, making sure there's funding, making sure that there's distribution, all of those things. It's constant work, but the XR world in some ways feels a little bit more fragile because it's less established. So I just wanted to mention that. And then I want to just touch on a question that's come in from Morgan, which I think now maybe we're going a little bit into the challenges. He says virtual media has never, as far as he understands, become the cultural revolution we were told it would. This comes up a lot. So we were promised that VR was going to be this, everyone was going to have headsets. We were all going to be in VR. What happened? Who wants to take a stab at that one? Why does everyone not have a headset?
Because we haven't built the headsets that we need yet. I think that, so I'm just jumping in here because this is something that I was thinking about last night about how, the VR narrative has blown hot and cold over the years. 1 minute it's the year of VR, the next thing VR is over. But I think when we speak specifically about the African context, for example, and this is something we've talked about, within this group, we know that we need to have the hardware that works for us, that works for our environment, that works for our context. And I think, we're seeing kind of like great work coming out of Eden with the Eden Snacker. And we need to expand it and start thinking about the kind of headsets that we can get locally. So we're not chasing hardware across the world. We know all the challenges about getting it, in continent. And when we have one that perhaps is, powered by solar energy as opposed to traditional electricity, which might be a challenge in some places, and I think we'll see more uptake. But to Morgan, it's definitely coming. If nothing else, I think over this period, as I've just looked at, different social cues from adverts where you see VR being used, to all of these different drivers because of the pandemic where people are engaging more with the technology, I think it is inevitable.
May I please actually just add on to what Judith is saying? Also, I think culturally, when you look at the way the global VR ecosystem has been created, I think the West, when we are creating it, the platforms and the ecosystems were not really meant for Africa. So it's very important for us to look at it from a human-centered design perspective and an environmental-centered design perspective. What will work for Africans? And I think the first frontier definitely is mobile. So how do we go back to what Judith is saying? How do we start building hardware that people, number one, if we trust the technology, I need to use a technology with something that I trust. And I trust a mobile phone. So if I can build a technology to be consumed from the mobile phone, I think that's the first step. And I think when John Carmack was talking about when they killed the Gear VR, which was a mobile-based VR platform, they said it was actually unfortunate, more or less like a mistake on their end. It's a missed opportunity because ideally, I think from a cultural perspective, creating infrastructures around how people can consume. And that's why Eden has created with the Snacker. It's as much as it's enterprise solution, it allows us to see it from a very African perspective and also in terms of scalability. So I think looking at it from a cultural perspective, it's very important for us to empower what technology we have. Phones, this is the new frontier.
Definitely. I think, Brian, hardware is one thing, but infrastructure and stuff around it is also really, really important. I think across the continent, we've still got massive connectivity issues, and just, I think just the way people get content and consume content, obviously it's mobile driven, but VR and immersive content tends to be a little bit heavier in terms of its data demand. So I think, the second we can start sort of ironing out these policies and getting people connected, that's the first step before we can even get people into VR. It's a really, really important thing to have people able to access content and able to access information around the content, to learn about these things online, to learn about things on YouTube. There are no real teachers that you can consult with locally, I don't think, unless you have access to select individuals or institutions. So I think University of YouTube is really, really important. And if people don't have those kinds of things at their disposal to educate themselves, it's a massive problem. So something we need to really, really look at. So yeah, that's from my side.
So one of the things I was thinking as you were all speaking is, so yeah, I totally agree with you, Judith. The headsets that we need for Africa haven't been invented yet, and also probably a lot of the stuff needs to be locally built, locally distributed, because we do have huge issues here getting hold of equipment cheaply. I mean, it's always possible to get hold of equipment, but you have to pay customs and all the rest of it. So one of the other things, though, that I do think is a huge roadblock here on the continent is internet access. And one of the things that I've really noticed recently, this excitement about all these amazing exhibitions happening in VR online now, because a lot of festivals have been cancelled this year. But if you have tried to download Museum of Other Realities, I pinged a link in the chat about that. So Cannes actually did an XR exhibition in Museum of Other Realities, but the file to download that was gigabytes and gigabytes. So you need to have fairly good internet and be able to afford it to even be able to get that file. And that's assuming you have a Quest headset. There's a lot of assumptions there to even be able to view that work from Cannes. So I sort of feel like a lot of these roadblocks are, some of them are roadblocks that we can address as a community of XR, but some of them are sort of bigger policy issues with government infrastructure, right? And that to me always feels like a bit of a, I don't know. I mean, Judith, you kind of think about those sort of big policy issues quite a lot, don't you, in your work?
I do, yes, absolutely. And I mean, Ingrid, you're spot on, because infrastructure, of course, has always been the foundation we lack when it comes to this work. But I think that, while we kind of like drive advocacy and policy to try and have the change that we need to happen with infrastructure happen, we also work in parallel to think, how can we, for now, kind of like create and consume these technologies within our current reality. And for example, that has meant that when we try to deploy for education, for example, we are looking at locally hosted content on devices as opposed to content that will have to be downloaded or streamed, because we know that that will not be possible, in a public school setting in Lagos, for example. But yeah, the work is ongoing. I think, we probably all have stories of collaboration and like attempts of partnership with government. And I think that must be the way forward. But then looking at that more broadly as well, from a Pan-African context, if you will, where we start to set an agenda for these technologies and the ways in which we will enable the technologies going forward. Great.
Yeah, so I think I mean, just in general in this conversation going forward, I mean, after this issue of internet is something that none of us can let go of, because until internet is more accessible and affordable, it just feels like we're never going to be able to do all the things that we want to do, because that's just one issue we can't solve on our own. So I think that's just, we have to situate ourselves. And I think that's why you'll hear us constantly talking about ecosystems. Some of the stuff is like big policy conversations that we need to be involved with. in order for this work to be really viable. So I just want to jump to some of the questions that are coming through. Thank you, really great questions. I think this is a very valid one that a lot of us will be thinking about is how do you, because the audiences are quite niche around this work, how do you basically sell the kind of idea of if you're trying to get funding for a project, how are you convincing people that there is an audience for this work? You know, where are the audiences? Where is the return on investment? How do you, and I think we're thinking now specifically of narrative-based work, documentary-based work. Where is that return on investment happening? How can you convince a funder that there's an audience for this work? I don't know if any of you want to jump in on that.
That's a tough one.
That's not very optimistic, guys.
Okay, so maybe I'll put in my 2 cents because that's a question that we would get a lot, you know, as we try to engage people around the technologies, particularly for, you know, filmmakers who were coming to us, especially if they had partners or investors, you know, they would be saying to them, why are you wasting your time doing this? How, you know, how are we going to get returns? What's the point? And what I would say to them is, if you make, you know, if you make this content and if you make good content, there isn't the traditional kind of like avenues to, you know, get returns that you would have from traditional film or traditional 2D medium. But if it is, you know, good enough that it gets enough recognition, then that elevates your profile. And that translates into, you know, work in other spaces related to immersive media. So it's not a direct, you know, connection between the narrative, you know, piece that you've created and that actually bringing kind of like financial returns in a traditional sense that I think you can live up. But I think it then does translate into a lot of opportunity to do work with organizations that do want that kind of storytelling and will pay, you know, the right amount for it. So, you know, that's the angle that we go with.
Gareth?
Sure, it's a tricky question. You know, I think a lot of clients will come to the party and say, look, we want VR content, but they don't really understand why they want VR content, if that makes sense. They're just kind of doing it as almost a knee-jerk reaction to people saying, oh, we need to go digital, we need to differentiate ourselves because we're doing this. You know, it's still quite hard. The audiences are still quite hard to reach, especially with the, you know, the finite number of headsets we have. What I am very excited about is sort of the applications of web VR, if that makes any sense. You know, like I think being able to reach people with immersive content through their traditional hardware setup. So, you know, being able to access a virtual experience from their browsers and things like that. So there's a lot of potential there, I think, for people to monetize that kind of content and to use that as a powerful tool to enhance their stories. So I think it's still very, very tricky. And as I said, there's a lot of opportunity, but there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of, you know, growing the audiences and finding those touch points, you know, where we can deploy this content. You know, for the most part, I think film festivals and XR exhibitions and things like that are obviously doing the most work in terms of audience engagement and getting people to experience those things. But we know those things don't, obviously in the time we're in now, aren't as prolific as they were before. So with things moving towards more sort of web-based experiences, you know, I think that's where the opportunity probably is at the moment, if it's not a sort of a brick and mortar exhibition or deployment strategy. You know, I think also enterprise VR, I think needs to be addressed, needs to be ironed out. Solutions need to be put in place if people are going to be using this kind of technology in the workplace. I think there's a lot of controversy around certain social platforms and their I guess their hold on enterprise VR at the moment. So I think those things need to be addressed, and we need to start ironing out you know, best practices for these technologies to use them in the best way. You know, I think enterprise VR is something that's been on our radar for a very long time, and something we've been pursuing to solve and to try and get this content to people that need to see it, you know, in the most hassle-free way. So I think that's it's a hard question.
Yeah, no. I mean, look, this is a hard question in all narrative work that we do. You know, funding and distribution is always thorny. One thing I just before we move on, Gareth, can you define web-based web VR? What is web VR? How differ from regular VR?
So obviously you're viewing it through your desktop or certain AR experiences, web AR, for instance, or augmented reality or cell phone, so running everything through a browser. So there's no need to have a hard-coded device with already pre-downloaded content. I think an example that I can give you is maybe Mozilla Hubs, which is a social platform where you can log into a social virtual platform using your browser, and obviously you don't have the full immersion, you're not fully present, you can't use your hands, your body doesn't move like it would in a virtual social platform with a headset on or controllers, but you're able to have basic interaction. So it's basically like the Zoom call, except I can move around a room and I can actually show you things or bring up different kinds of media, and we can have a lot more sort of a show and tell based experience based on the environment that we're in. So quite exciting in terms of what's out there. And I know obviously people are using it for virtual tours, so accessing 360 content on a desktop as opposed to watching it in a headset. Again, your immersion isn't the same, but you're still able to explore spaces in a 360 environment, which is very, very, very valuable, I think, and very important that we look at this little corner of the market as well, I think.
Great. And if anyone's interested in models for sustainability in this space, in Immersive Media, I posted a link on immerse.news. There's an article called Models of Sustainability for Immersive Media by Sarah Wallison. And she actually lays out how a lot of countries are kind of dealing with funding this work. Everything from government funding to, VC funding. I mean, the whole gamut, and including second jobs, right? That you fund your work by having a teaching job or doing client-based work. So it's really everything on there. And I think, it's worth reading and just sort of looking at how different countries are also approaching this. One thing I will say is that when the British public money started going into the VR space, there's now this Creative XR fund. I suddenly started seeing a lot more really exciting VR work coming out of the UK. So it just shows, and it's not a huge investment. I mean, it's a lot, but it's not massive. But it made such a huge difference in terms of the quality of the work that you're seeing coming out of the UK. So, I think getting government support and public monies in the space is really important. You need a mixed ecosystem of support. That's always been my belief. You need public money, private money, a little bit of everything to make it really rich. Just before we move on, a question, and maybe this kind of taps back to this idea of web VR. How do you, this is from Maximilian, how do you see the adoption curve in Africa happening specifically in poorer communities? I think this is interesting because I feel like maybe so far we've kind of just been assuming that there's a level of technological adoption that requires cash, frankly. Is there a model here for poorer communities? Can and how, and if so, how can poorer communities XR work in Africa?
Maybe I can take, because this is something that we've been really thinking about. And the reason why I say the future in Africa lies in mobile, because there are people who, even here in Kenya, cannot access maybe basic services like water and stuff, but have internet on mobile. So as much as you look at the whole bandwidth and what you would require to consume maybe high fidelity VR work, still people can consume, let's say, 360 videos on mobile phones, small AR executions on mobile. So I think just because a mobile point is a convergence for, a lot of people can go on mobile for social purposes, but can also access internet. I think this is where the key is, and we should be able to exploit. Because when you look at the big infrastructure and you're looking at an Oculus Quest or an Oculus Go, there's definitely even people right now in matured markets that cannot afford $500 just to buy an Oculus Quest. So when you're looking at the communities, I think the first point of reference or frontier should be the mobile because of internet. And let's say right now you have packages of internet whereby, in Kenya, we have packages where when you get a SIM card, WhatsApp is for free. Or right now there's packages that have YouTube for free. And you don't need the best type of phone for you to be able to consume content off YouTube. And there's a lot of 360 work, VR work on YouTube as well. So I just feel like even for these communities, as long as you have a mobile phone, this is a really powerful tool.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I guess one of the things that I think is really interesting at the moment is it does feel like now with YouTube 360 and, Vimeo supports 360, and hopefully there'll be more support for 360 videos on apps like WhatsApp. As far as I know, WhatsApp still doesn't support 360, does it? Video? I don't think so.
No,
that would be a game changer, just to be able to share 360 videos. So it feels like in terms of access for 360 work, I can kind of see a pathway. I have to say for SICK stuff, and there I'm talking about, VR where you're moving through a space using a headset like a Quest or a Vive. I think that's a lot more problematic. And the way that we're kind of thinking it through is, where are the spaces, public spaces, where we can take VR and do pop-up screening? So it's more about access to the work. So, are there community centers? Are there churches? Are there libraries? Libraries for me have always just been this magical space where a lot of people convene. What are the spaces where people already gather in communities in different regions? And then how can we bring VR to those spaces and create a new kind of exhibition model? So that would be my response. I think in terms of exhibition, there are things you can do. You just have to kind of do them. You have to build those exhibition models, get them funded and do it. But in terms of who gets to make the work, I think it's a little bit more like that. That's a whole other side, like who actually gets to be in that space, to be making work. And I think that's something we probably need to address better.
Definitely. To add on to that, I think, it's so important that we have spaces like maker spaces and these hubs where people can access the technology. Sure, they might not own it yet, or they might not have direct access to it, but some kind of shared space where, they could at least find out about these technologies and direct any questions to people who might be running the spaces. And sadly, I think, these spaces are often underfunded and underutilized just because of the state of how things are. And I think those spaces, we need more of those kinds of shared spaces where people can access this tech and ask the right questions and ask the hard questions, and also spaces where they can experience these kinds of new works, because that's the most important thing, is allow people to actually interact with this technology.
Okay, a couple of other questions coming in. Are there any examples of documentary projects that have successfully combined exhibition on sites with an online presence? So I guess this is projects that have exhibited at film festivals or other kinds of festivals and then are also online. I would say, a lot of projects that I've seen at festivals have then ended up being online on the Oculus store, for example. So if you look at a project like Roger Ross Williams' Traveling While Black, an incredible 360 project, he had a really cool installation at Sundance where the project launched, where you could actually sit in a replica of the diner. But then the piece is now free. I don't know if it's free, but it's available on the Oculus store. So as long as you have access to some kind of headset, you can watch it on the Oculus store. There definitely have been a lot of examples of projects that launch on site, at a film festival or whatever, often as an installation, and then are just put online, once they've done their sort of festival run. I don't know if there's any projects that any of you want to sort of point to as good examples of documentary projects that have had a life online and offline.
Yeah, I can speak about one from our community, Daughters of Tribeca. So that was a documentary piece around the kidnapping of the Chibok girls in Nigeria 6 years ago, and it was made to commemorate the anniversary of that. So the kind of like initial launch of it was actually a community event out like in public spaces in Lagos, under a bridge, in the parks, that sort of thing. And then it then went on the festival circuit, a number of like major film festivals, and it's now available. It's just been put on the Oculus store this past week, where it's available for free to watch. Oh, that's great. Yeah, definitely recommend watching Daughters of Chibok if you can. It's really very powerful. And then, I guess another example are Jomoke Sunwo's piece, which is currently touring festivals, but eventually will be available online. Yeah. This is Lagos at Large. So, she is showing the work at festivals, but this piece will go online for audiences. And I think that is a very common, and the online exhibit can either be for free or you can charge something. So there are some business models there
on the back end. You know, they're limited, but they're definitely there. Okay, now the questions come through, but I think this kind of comes back to what we were talking about earlier around policy, and I feel like there's only so much we can say about this. This is about data bundle issues and network connections in South Africa, where we pay a lot more than in other African countries. All I can say is I 100% agree with you, but I sort of feel like that's a bigger issue than we can address on this panel. I wish we could solve that. But yes, you're right. I think expensive data is a huge barrier to innovation. I mean, that's my 100 cents on this issue.
I've also got something to add there. You know, I think, I don't know if you guys have been following the news, but there's obviously a very problematic bill that's just been passed in our country in terms of the internet censorship bill. And it's shaken me a little bit this week, just looking into it. You know, I think it's so important that we have freedom of speech and open connections and things like that. And this bill, while it might have good intentions in terms of protecting people online, in terms of the media we share, I think it's quite problematic in terms of who has that control and who has the say over what kind of video content we can publish. So basically the bill is basically stating that any piece of a video that goes online or is published has to be vetted by some kind of council, some kind of board that has to approve your content. And there's you know, obviously people trying to protect you know, viewers from bad content or hate speech, and which is completely valid, and I really get behind. But I think the legislation is kind of very loose in terms of what how it outlines different kinds of content, and I think that's a bigger discussion to be had. You know, what are these different kinds of content, and how are they classified, and how are they you know, monitored, and who is monitoring them? I think it's a really, really big issue that a lot of people aren't actually taking notice of.
I totally agree. Yeah, and I think that's the kind of thing where we, as a documentary community, as an XR community, like we really have to keep our eyes on this other stuff, because it affects us. You know, it often feels like it's kind of government stuff happening over there, but it totally affects, you know, how we make our work, how we get our work out to audiences. It's really like key that having cheap access, cheap and available access, open access, for me is key for us to be able to do the work that we want to do. I think that's very true. Okay, so I guess maybe now if we could just talk a little bit about how we're going to move forward in terms of building Immersive Africa. What needs to happen? I mean, obviously we want to have cheaper access to good internet. We want freedom of speech online. So we want to be able to get this work out there to audiences, and we need to be making headsets here on the continent. These headsets, you know, are accessible and work on the continent. But what else can we be doing as a community? And I'm thinking now, obviously, you know, you're all working in different ways, somewhat in this narrative documentary space, but also doing enterprise work and client-based work around marketing and advertising. How can we make this Immersive Africa network stronger? You know, one of the things that I would like to mention is I sort of feel like obviously a lot of countries, there's 54 countries, but it does feel like a lot of things are happening in certain countries. How do we make this more like across Africa focused? Like what needs to happen to really build this? Maybe Judith, since you're building this hackathon, you can talk a little bit about how you see us strengthening this Immersive Africa network so that more people can tap into it and get involved.
Absolutely. So I'll kind of like link back to one of the things that you talked about earlier, which was access points, when we were talking about, you know, how poor communities have been able to engage with the technologies. And one of the firm beliefs that we have with, you know, the AR/VR Africa hackathons and the other community-based work we do is that we need to have as many access points as possible. Now, we started that with mini labs, but I think that that's something that we should aim to have in as many African cities as possible, because very quickly these become focal points for people to engage with the technologies, for communities to gather, and for creation to happen. The other element that I think is really critical is that we need to, I think, more aggressively start driving an agenda with our governments to start thinking about the ways in which we collaborate across the continent to have a regional, I suppose, a regional agenda for these immersive technologies, you know, because I think with that, we can start to do things around influencing telcos, for example, we can start to think about talent when it comes to immersive technology, because I think that's a huge space where there's a lot of work to be done. And we should be thinking about what that means across, levels of education that we have. We also have to think about how we enable things from a business perspective so that you're encouraging, both foreign investment in immersive technology on the continent, but also inspiring younger people on the continent, or older people, to want to kind of set up shop when it comes to these technologies across whatever sector it may be. So I think, they're kind of all of these different spaces in which we need to start operating, but it probably all comes from us deciding these are the pillars that we want to build. And I would definitely recommend, across access, talent, education, and this enabling environment from a business perspective as well.
Great, thank you. Sorry, Brian, jump in, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in when Judith spoke about enabling these communities. I think it's also very important to see how well we can empower filmmakers who are already working within the film sector, but then do not understand this new value that has been created in VR. And some of the filmmakers we've been talking to here in Nairobi, there's a problem, and we're calling it analysis paralysis. They really they analyze a lot when it comes to what are the rules of thumb, what not to do, what to do, instead of just jumping on it and saying, guys, let's produce something. So it's very important as protagonists to come up with workshops, solutions for them to sit down and have, communities that can sit down and say, okay, guys, we're trying to come up with this. How do we start shooting? What is a camera work? And also showing relevance in the whole value chain of the production. So it's just not about shooting. There's a whole value chain, a distribution, there's, marketing. How do we go about it? So I feel it's very important to already empower the filmmakers who are already in this business, just to look at immersive technology as a potential and understanding the business sense of it. Because at the end of the day, as Africans, they would also look at a balance sheet. It's a P&L, it's a profit and loss. So if I get someone who's going to fund my project, then how do they get an ROI? Sometimes, and the honest truth is, within VR or the 360 immersive technology, the ROI might not be feasible, but there's a lot of benefits you can get out of it. So I think empowering the filmmakers should be something that we should be really looking at.
Gareth, how about you?
I think, yeah, Ingrid, the work that you guys are doing at Electric South is so important in terms of mapping, who all the people are in the landscape, firstly to identify all these players that are emerging, and even people that are just, enthusiasts, and finding a way that we can get all of these voices into one sort of unified channel, or one kind of body that helps, that's part of key decision making, in terms of certain things in their country, in relation to the governments or boards or, best practices for the technologies moving forward. I think that's really, it's a huge task. But I think formalizing in some way and finding a way that we can all actually contribute and share our knowledge is the most important step. A place where we can all actually just talk about the issues and find solutions and share technology and share hardware, share expertise. The AR and VR labs that you guys run are very close to our hearts, and I think that's part of something that needs to be replicated on a bigger scale if we're going to really develop the skills and develop the knowledge around the tools and the technology. I think that's of the utmost important. It's a massive job. It's
But I totally agree. And for me, I just feel like the more we can be open and collaborate and create genuine communities around this and be welcoming. I think one of the things, and this is maybe something that's come through from some of the questions, is we use a lot of terminology in the VR XR, I'm doing it already, a lot of acronyms, and it can be very off-putting to people, and it feels very technological, and actually it isn't. I mean, some of it is, but some of it always is, and actually it should feel much more welcoming and much more accessible. And I think we all have a lot of work to do there to make it feel like it's something that everyone is part of, and that all boats rise together. And we, of course, there is some good co-opetition that should be in the space. I mean, that's what makes a space work. But in some, even at the point where we can really compete, because there isn't enough of a landscape to compete in. So I think it's got to be collaborative and really, really welcoming. And I think that's something that as we build this. And I hope that a lot of you listening can be part of that. We want this to be something that you all feel welcome in. And obviously for me, it's really important that people of color and women feel that this space is for them, and that we're building the space together. So that's something we just have to keep doing and pushing for, and making sure that we don't kind of give up, because sometimes it can feel a lot easier to just be like, it's too hard. I think the time. So I feel like we're getting towards the end of our time, and we want to protect your Zoom brains, because I think Zoom brains are getting more and more fragile as we go through this pandemic. So we're not going to do this for 90 minutes because it's too much. It's too much Zooming. But I want to end on a creative note. I think it's a nice way for people to feel, we're creative work, and I feel like maybe we should end this by talking less around the policy and more about what makes the space magical. What is it about VR and AR? And by the way, we haven't spoken much about AR, so maybe you can talk a little bit about that in your answers. So one of the questions was, what creative techniques do you see that create opportunities for VR experiences creatively that are different to, what makes them special? So she mentions thinking about spatial audio. What is it about VR experiences that make them richer digital experiences? What is it for you that's so magical about this space? What makes this work? What makes VR and AR different to traditional media?
So I'll jump in, and when I first started to tell people about virtual reality and the immersive technology, I would tell them that the only limit they have is their imagination. I mean, that's a bit of an exaggeration, obviously, the tools and all of that. But what I meant by that was that literally, you could imagine and then start to create around that. And in a place like Nigeria, when we first started to get people in VR headsets, one of the experiences that people would like to try out a lot was the Explore the World option from Oculus videos. And, with that, you could, have a 360 experience of a city in most countries of the world. And people would have that experience, and then they would take off the headset and say to me, imagine, you mean I can actually travel without having to get a visa? Now, if you know anything about the Nigerian passport, you know that getting visas is one of the grand challenges of life. So that was the first thing, that we were transported to wherever in the world they wanted to be. And, alongside that, when I used to tell people about the potential of the technology, I would say, imagine taking this, to the most kind of rural outpost that you can think, in Nigeria, any African country, and being able to put a headset on a child and, all of a sudden, completely expand their reality from what they see every day to, places across the world to places across the galaxy. It is absolutely mind-blowing. And to be able to do that, when someone is 5 years old or 6 years old, I say, then imagine what they will create when they grow. So I think for all of those reasons, it is magic.
Ryan, why is it magic for you?
Man, so one day we had a project in a place called Kibera. It's an informal settlement in Nairobi. And just next to Kibera is an animal. They say Kenya is the only city, Nairobi is the only city in the world that has a live national park in the proximity of its city. The juxtaposition of animals and the buildings can be in the same frame, right? And Kibera is not far from the national park, right? And we had this experience we were doing with a ballet school there, and we decided to carry a bunch of VR headsets and go into the local community and show them about animals. There's kids who live next to the animals that have never seen them. And for the first time, when they wore the VR headsets, they could actually see the animals live. Okay, not live, but in full 360 fashion. This was so powerful for us, and it just reinforces our mission and vision to always ensure that the demystification of the technology is something we hold high and in such high regard. Because of the sheer fact that a woman would actually just get off her headset and cry just by the virtue of her being in a space that she would have never afforded to go to, or she'd have never been able to experience it. This is the magic behind it. it's headache putting this stuff together sometimes, you know, in terms of a production pipeline when you look at it. But at the end of the day, the value you get out of showcasing what AR and VR can do, I think is priceless. And this is what keeps us going, even if it's not making financial sense for us. When COVID hit, it hit us really hard. For 4 months, we were not getting any business until I think people suddenly realized, guys, there is something here because virtual reality can actually bridge that gap. So for me, I think it's just the magic of seeing people travel to places that they've never been and go to places that maybe eventually they'll never go to is amazing. And this is where the magic is.
Great. Gareth?
Definitely. I think, you know, for anyone who hasn't experienced VR, it's very hard to explain that feeling of actually being in a space that's designed specifically for you. You know, it's a medium that puts you at the center of all the experience. And it's a really fantastic way to I guess, share really kinds of diverse kinds of media, you know, and I think there's such a huge potential for all the amazing things we create as humans and all the amazing media we create as human beings and put them into meaningful experiences, you know, not just a digital experience. It's an experience that can really actually change the way we interact and consume media. You know, I think it's such a powerful tool. Chris Milk, I think, calls it the last medium. You know, it's no longer that barrier between you and the screen. You know, there's so many opportunities to show somebody something, to share knowledge, to really help people understand a space. You know, it's really, really transformative in my opinion, and I think it's so exciting because it's just the beginning, you know, and it's just we're on the cusp, you know, we're about to break through into that mode where we actually start using the technology for its hopefully for its best purposes and to really shape the way we experience humanity and consciousness, I think.
So I think this is actually a really good way to end. I was just saying to Delisa was asking a question about ethics in VR, and I was actually just replying to him saying I don't think we have time to address that. Like that's a panel in itself. Mm-hmm. But actually, just given the conversation that we've just had around the magic of VR, it actually is really relevant, and I think maybe we can wrap on that because I remember being absolutely horrified when Zuckerberg made a comment about how, and I think he used Africa as an example, how kids in Africa would be able to go to Paris because they'd never actually go to Paris in VR, you know, and it was this assumption that kids in Africa, they'll get VR because they're not going to get any of the other stuff. And I was just like, no, like that is absolutely not the future that I want. You know, I don't want VR. And I guess what I'm saying is that it is amazing to give people access to these things, but you also want people to have access to these things, right? So you've got to kind of hold both realities at the same time. You want equal access on all levels, including reality and virtual reality. But that said, you know, there are amazing ways to give people experiences in VR in a visceral way. And I think, Maximilian, this is going to your question, that like actually feel viscerally different to what that experience would feel like if you were watching, for example, a short film or reading a book about the same topic. But those same experiences can be very, very upsetting. You know, I've been in experiences where there's been a bomb blast or sexual assault in VR. And of course, if you're not prepared for that, it can be incredibly triggering. So, you know, I think that and those are extreme examples. I think on the other end of the spectrum, there's all sorts of other issues around ethics, not just in terms of the story, but also in terms of who's controlling the space right now. I mean, I'm just thinking about the fact that right now, I think developers now have to sign in with a Facebook login. Is that correct? They've just changed.
2023 onwards, yeah, it'll be.
Right. So like that's another whole ethical question around who controls the space. So I don't know if this is so much a question, but I guess maybe we can just end with a kind of how you see us proceeding, like ethically. What do we need to do now so that we can all move forward and make this space as equal and safe as possible? And we'll kind of wrap the conversation on that, and with an African focus. Judith.
Yeah. So one of the things that I suppose one of my takeaways from like doing this work over the years is that there certainly was a sense that immersive technologies in Africa is a nice to have, but not a necessity. And you know, and nobody, and I think it's very important for us on the continents to be very intentional about wanting to shape these technologies and to have a voice in defining what they will be, because that is not something that we're going to get from anywhere else. So it has to be kind of like a driver for our agenda as well. Because from an ethics perspective, I think it's really critical. I don't think immersive technology should be shaped by, you know, perspectives from only one part of the world or certain parts of the world only. I think, like, you know, you need all global voices, particularly because these technologies are going to underpin so much of the future when it comes to technology and the way we live and the way we work. I think my one takeaway would be that we need to be very, very intentional about being African in the immersive technology space and in elevating African immersive technology so that it is helping to shape what the global narrative will be.
Yeah. Brian.
My take would be to look at it from a perspective of empowerment. I think because we are creating something that it's nascent, it possesses a lot of potential, but we really need to define what that potential is from an inception point, so that even if there are any iterations or anyone comes after us, we've already molded their mind thinking from the positive side of deploying the technology. I think it's a huge burden on us, guys. It's not really a joke. It's a huge burden on us thinking about the responsibility we have to ensure that the technology is perceived from a socially and a positive way. And remember, from all this community work that we're doing, from creating the communities to creating infrastructure, it all has to be, for lack of a better word, it has to have a positive vibe so that whoever comes after it can see the potential in doing good for the technology and how the technology will do it. And that's why I always talk about trusting the technology. Once they trust the technology and they can use it for, you know, different iterations in their life, then it means that we've done a good job with it. But I'm also not a naive person. I know that a lot of people are going to use it for bad, which is, it's life, you know. But at the end of the day, my responsibility as a protagonist has to be using XR for good. And how do we instill those values in the people coming after us?
Great. Gareth?
I completely agree. XR for good is the motto. But, you know, I think there's a bigger responsibility just in terms of our information ecology in general. We need to really be quite sensitive as to you know, how we share information and how we just sort of communicate as a species, you know, and it's quite a big brain thought to think about, you know, but it's really important because, you know, we have to think about how these kinds of things at scale can affect different kinds of users, you know. We can't have this homogenized take on or a prescribed sort of way of interacting with these technologies from one source, as Judith mentioned. I think it's very important that we diversify. We build sort of grassroots up responses to these things, you know, and to these giant platforms. You know, the attention economy, we know it's reaching critical mass. You know, there's so much online to see and do, and so many notifications on your phone on a daily basis. You know, I think we have to be very, very, very careful about how we move forward, and as soon as these sort of ecologies are moving from just our flat screen to our, you know, wearables and things like that, we have to be extremely careful how we tread, because if we go too far, you know, it's going to be very hard to undo these things if we don't address these issues now. And I think it's very, very important that we come together and we make the right decisions as a collective, you know, XR for good all the way. Make sure that we do this right, because we won't have another chance if we get it wrong.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like there is a lot of opportunities to do some really, I think, to build some really bad dystopian futures here. And I don't think any of us really want to be part of that. So, okay, I think with that, we're going to give everyone their Zoom brains back. But I'm so grateful to all of you, not just for being part of this panel, but for being part of this movement. It's been really amazing working with you over the last few years, you know, and I feel so much less lonely. You know, working in this space can feel really lonely sometimes, because it feels like you know, and I've used this expression so many times, but it feels like you're building the bridge while you're walking across it, and it really does. And to know that there's other people building that bridge with me is a really amazing feeling. And I hope that for those of you listening, you kind of feel like there's more of a community that you can tap into, and that if you're in Lagos, you've got Immersive 3D there, you've got Judith there. If you're in Nairobi, you can reach out to Brian. We've actually used Brian and BlackRhino VR to kind of help us with a bunch of our projects. You know, they've been co-producers with us, you know, just to have some really cool, really knowledgeable, really talented VR producers in Nairobi. Like, for me, that was just such a game change, like knowing I could tap into that resource. And of course they know all the other cool people in Nairobi, so it's like these circles, these concentric circles, just constantly expanding. And then Gareth and with Eden and Joburg just doing mind-blowing work. So, you know, tap into all of these folks, and hopefully it will really help you to kind of feel like, you know, even if you are building this bridge, you're not building it alone. And yeah, and sorry, Gareth just mentioned there's a VR community, and you can join that meetup. He's posted a link. It's We Are VR Josie. I always say that wrong. We Are VR Josie. So yeah, if you want to join that online, you know, you can kind of feel like you're part of an online community too, which is really nice, because we need each other in this space. We really do. Cool. Thank you everyone. Thank you everyone who joined us, and keep building that bridge. See you all soon. And thanks, Encounters.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.